She scrubbed their filth for 2 decades, then strode into the boardroom and annihilated their king. They called her the Help. Not Eleanor Vance, not the woman from custodial services, not even Mrs. Vance, a title she had earned and cherished. Just the Help. A ghost in a gray jumpsuit, a phantom pushing a sloshing bucket of dirty water through the halls of a titan it had built. Every goddamn morning at 4:15 a.m., long before the first Armani suit graced the lobby and the sharks in sales started sharpening their teeth on last night's numbers, she was there, a silent sentinel pushing a rickety cart past the towering smoked glass monolith of Sterling Thorne Global. What do you think is going through a person's mind when they're invisible? When they're treated like a piece of furniture that just happens to move? Drop a comment below, because I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at the person cleaning your office the same way again. And hey, while you're down there, smash that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss what's coming. Her uniform, a drab industrial gray, had surrendered its color to time and 1,000 wash cycles, becoming a washed-out, lifeless shroud. Her orthopedic shoes, once supportive, were now flattened husks of rubber and cracked leather, each scuff mark a testament to the miles she'd walked on the polished marble floors of that corporate mausoleum. She kept a worn-out rag perpetually tucked into her back pocket, a silent, almost stoic expression etched onto her face, and a deliberate, unhurried rhythm in her movements that spoke of a routine so ingrained it had become part of her very being. She'd been doing this for 19 years. 19 goddamn years. 19 years of fishing out soggy, half-eaten donuts from boardroom trash cans, of scraping fossilized chewing gum from the underside of break room tables, of wiping the greasy fingerprints of the self-important off the brushed steel elevator panels that no one, not once, ever thought to clean themselves. To the vast majority of the Gucci-clad, Ivy League-educated automatons who worked at Sterling Thorne, she was less than wallpaper. She was a void, a non-entity. If she was in the room, they'd talk over her, through her, around her, their voices never once dipping in volume, their eyes never once acknowledging her presence. She was a ghost in their machine. There were exceptions, of course. A few souls not yet corrupted by the toxic culture of casual cruelty. They were usually the fresh-faced interns, the wide-eyed temps who hadn't yet received the unspoken memo that ignoring the janitorial staff was a key performance indicator of your own rising importance. But Eleanor wasn't bitter. Bitterness was a hot, consuming fire, and she needed a cold, patient flame. So she kept her head bowed, her lips sealed, and her ears wide open. And oh, the things she heard. She listened to the booming, self-congratulatory laughter that echoed from the corner offices on the 40th floor. She absorbed the hushed, venomous conversations that people thought weren't important enough to whisper. Conversations about affairs, about backstabbing, about cooking the books, the crude jokes, the staggering arrogance, the casual, everyday lies. She built an empire of knowledge with nothing more than a mop, a bucket, and an exceptional pair of ears. One afternoon, a rising star in the marketing department, a slick, smarmy kid named Brad, left his half-eaten burrito precariously balanced on the rim of a trash can instead of placing it inside. A simple act of lazy entitlement. Eleanor picked it up, the tortilla cold and greasy in her gloved hand, and dropped it into the bin without a word. Brad swaggered by a moment later, phone pressed to his ear, didn't even offer a nod of thanks. He just paused his call long enough to look directly at her and say, "Make sure that carpet is bone dry before the quarterly review at 3 right? I don't want it smelling like wet dog when the VPs get here." She gave him a small, placid smile and a single, slow nod. The next day, in a fit of theatrical frustration during a conference call, Brad slammed his fist on his desk, sending a venti-sized latte splashing across that very same carpet. He immediately blamed her, of course, claiming she hadn't cleaned it properly, that a lingering dampness had somehow attracted the coffee. She just nodded again, her expression unchanging. It wasn't the first time she had been a convenient scapegoat, and she knew with a chilling certainty it wouldn't be the last. Up on the executive floor, the 44th, a senior vice president named Marcus Thorne, a man who moved in a cloud of expensive cologne and cheap condescension, once guffawed with his sycophantic assistant, "Can you even imagine it, Jessica? Working in a place like this your whole life and never even having a desk to call your own?" Eleanor was right there, polishing the glass wall of his office. She heard every word. He didn't care. Why would he? He didn't know who she was. None of them did. That entire building was a monument to people who believed their job title was a measure of their human worth, who thought respect was something you earned by hitting quarterly targets and scheduling 9 a.m. meetings that could have, and should have, been an email. They were blissfully, fatally unaware that Eleanor Vance didn't need their validation, because Eleanor Vance, the ghost in the gray jumpsuit, owned a bigger piece of that company than every single soul in that building, including Marcus Thorne himself. But she hadn't breathed a word of it. Not yet. And as she pushed her squeaking cart past the silent, imposing offices that morning, pausing to wipe a smudge from the gleaming corporate logo on the wall, a smudge left by the hand of a man who now ran the company they had built together, her burner phone vibrated silently in her pocket. It was a single encrypted text message, just 4 words. "The board is set." She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her face an unreadable mask of calm. Then she continued on her rounds, the rhythmic squeak of the cart echoing in the empty hall. But this time, she wasn't just cleaning floors. She was marching toward an execution, and not a single person in that building even knew they were on death row. Before Eleanor Vance ever held a mop at Sterling Thorne Global, she sat at a battered oak kitchen table in a small apartment in Portland, Maine, poring over logistics charts and fuel cost projections with her husband, Arthur Vance. That was long before the name Sterling Thorne existed. Back then, it was just a dream, an idea sketched out on a pile of diner napkins. Arthur had the fire. He possessed a raw, untamable ambition that couldn't be taught in any business school. He'd grown up wrestling lobster traps on his father's boat, learning the unforgiving rhythms of the tides and the hard-won profits of the sea. He understood logistics in his bones, the intricate dance of supply and demand, long before it became a trendy corporate buzzword. Eleanor, however, was the quiet architect behind the dream. She was the strategist, the one who saw the patterns everyone else missed. She rarely spoke in meetings, but she had a preternatural ability to dissect a problem, to quietly dismantle it piece by piece until she found the flawed gear in the machine. In the late 90s, Arthur and his childhood best friend, a charismatic but dangerously impulsive man named Curtis Sterling, pooled their meager savings to start a small shipping brokerage. They began with a cramped, rented office over a fish market, 2 bulky cell phones, and a second-hand fax machine that jammed more often than it worked. Eleanor was their first and most significant investor. Her grandmother had left her a modest inheritance, a sum that most people would have used for a down payment on a house, a sensible, safe investment. But Eleanor saw a different kind of future. "Put it all in your name, Artie," she told him one night, her hand resting on his. "And Curtis's. I'll stay behind the scenes. No one needs to know I'm involved." He looked at her, his eyes full of love and a hint of disbelief. "Are you sure, Elle? This is everything." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "And I trust you. Both of you." That trust would become her life's greatest regret. Over the next 5 years, the company, Sterling and Vance Logistics, became a regional powerhouse. Curtis was the face of the operation, his easy charm and back-slapping demeanor winning them contracts up and down the East Coast. Arthur was the engine, the operational genius who made sure every truck ran on time, every shipment arrived intact. And Eleanor, from the shadows, was the guardian. She managed the books with a surgeon's precision, filed all the incorporation paperwork, and drafted their contracts, shrewdly structuring the ownership through a separate, anonymous LLC that she controlled. It was her way of building a firewall, of protecting their dream and their family. But she couldn't protect Arthur from a patch of black ice on a lonely stretch of I-95 in the winter of 2006, a late-night run to oversee a critical shipment, a tired driver, a jackknifed rig. He was gone in an instant. Curtis Sterling delivered a sterile, corporate-sounding eulogy at the funeral. He spoke of Arthur as a valued colleague and a great asset, barely mentioning Eleanor by name. It was the first cold chill of betrayal. The second, and far more brutal, came a few weeks later. While Eleanor was still drowning in a sea of grief, Curtis, along with a new partner, Marcus Thorne, a slick corporate raider he'd been meeting with secretly for months, filed a series of documents. They dissolved Sterling and Vance and immediately reformed it as Sterling Thorne Global, using a legal loophole to argue that Arthur's death rendered his ownership stake null and void. They quietly, ruthlessly, pushed Eleanor out of all company communications, assuming the grieving widow would be too broken to fight back. They assumed wrong. Eleanor had the receipts, not just emotional ones, but hard, legal, ironclad proof. She had the original, notarized partnership agreements that gave her controlling ownership of Arthur's 50% share in the event of his death. More than that, she had leverage. She could have marched into that office with a team of lawyers and bled them dry in the courts. She could have exposed their fraud to the world. But Eleanor understood the critical difference between raw power and perfect timing. A public lawsuit would have been messy, costly, and would have likely destroyed the company Arthur had poured his life into. So she waited. She melted back into the shadows, offering only a terrifying, unnerving silence. No angry phone calls, no threatening letters from lawyers. Just silence. Then, in the fall of 2007, a small, inconspicuous ad appeared in a local community paper for a night shift janitorial position at Sterling Thorne Global's new headquarters in Boston. She circled it in red pen. 3 days later, she walked into the HR department with a fabricated resume, a burner phone, and a brand new pair of steel-toed work boots. She was hired on the spot. Curtis Sterling, when he passed her in the hall, didn't even give her a second glance. By that time, he was already being phased out, a relic of the old company, pushed aside by the far more ruthless Marcus Thorne, a man who didn't know the first thing about how the company was built, but knew exactly how to wear a bespoke suit and project an aura of absolute authority. And so, for the next 19 years, Eleanor kept her head down. She showed up, night after night, one floor at a time. Every overflowing trash can she emptied, every sordid bathroom she scrubbed. It wasn't just a job. It was surveillance. It was reconnaissance. She listened, she watched, she waited, and she kept every single goddamn receipt. But eventually, everything that you bury finds its way back to the surface, and Eleanor Vance was almost done digging. By her 10th year in the shadows, Eleanor knew every dirty secret hidden within the gleaming glass and steel of the Sterling Thorne Tower in Boston, Massachusetts. She knew which executive had a gambling problem, leaving debt collection notices crumpled in his trash. She knew which floor had a secret liquor cabinet hidden behind a loose panel, and which of the directors were using their corporate expense accounts to fund lavish rendezvous with their mistresses. She didn't have to guess what was happening to her husband's legacy. She was witnessing its desecration firsthand, every single night. Sterling Thorne had morphed from a tight-knit, hard-working logistics company into a cold, soulless corporate behemoth. Upper management, led by the impeccably dressed and morally bankrupt CEO, Marcus Thorne, resided in their ivory tower on the 44th floor, spouting meaningless corporate jargon, while the frontline workers, the lifeblood of the company, were being bled dry. She would watch the overnight warehouse crews shuffle in, their faces etched with exhaustion, their backs aching from pulling double shifts, clutching overtime slips that would inevitably get lost in the payroll system. She'd overhear the whispers in the human resources department, the hushed conversations about how they could subtly reduce the quality of the employees' health insurance plans without causing an uproar. More than once, she silently mopped the floor around a mid-level manager being unceremoniously escorted out by security, fired without warning for having the audacity to question a new, draconian policy. One of them, a decent man named David Chen, made the fatal error of speaking up in a company-wide meeting about the growing wage gap between the executive team and the rest of the staff. He was gone by the end of the week, his career at Sterling Thorne erased as if he had never existed. In those rooms, Eleanor was invisible, and her invisibility was her greatest weapon. No one filtered their words around the cleaning lady. At first, she simply listened, her mind a steel trap, locking away every damning conversation. But then she started writing it all down. In her locker, tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick, she kept a series of small black notebooks. They were filled with dates, names, direct quotes, and meticulously recorded details. Who said what, when they said it, who else was in the room, and what the context was. A casual flip through the pages would reveal entries that read like a prosecutor's diary. Feb 14th. We can slash the bonus pool for the entire logistics division by 40%. They're blue-collar guys. They'll bitch for a week and then they'll get over it. It's not like they have other options. Marcus Thorne to the CFO. Conference room 4th B. June 3rd. Warehouse safety rail reported broken for the 3rd time. Forklift operator, a kid named Leo, nearly went over the edge. No incident report filed. Supervisor told him to walk it off. Maria from receiving saw the whole thing. Aug 19th. Heard Marcus Thorne on the phone with his lawyer, laughing. Let the janitor clean it up, he said, referring to a massive coffee spill in his office. That's what we pay her peasant wages for. I was standing right outside his door. It wasn't bitterness that fueled her anymore. Bitterness was a fleeting emotion. What she felt was a cold, clarifying rage. She saw a company, Arthur's company, drowning in its own greed and arrogance. One night, around 11:45 p.m., Eleanor paused her cart outside the executive suite. The entire floor was dark, save for a sliver of light escaping from under the door of the main boardroom. She could hear the clinking of glasses and boisterous laughter. Marcus Thorne's voice, lubricated by expensive scotch, carried clearly into the hallway. So, I tell the guy, I say, if you don't like your paycheck, you can clock out right now and go try your luck driving for Uber. I've got a stack of resumes a foot high from guys who would kill for your job. A wave of sycophantic laughter followed. Then one of the VPs, a notoriously cruel woman named Elizabeth Finch, added, Honestly, half these people should be grateful we even let them breathe the same air as us. They all roared with laughter again. Eleanor stood there in the shadows, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of her mop. She didn't move. She just stood there, a silent, unseen judge, absorbing their contempt. After a long moment, she turned and walked away. Not with a sense of defeat, but with a profound sense of confirmation. This place wasn't just broken, it was septic. And you don't heal a septic wound by asking nicely. You cut out the rot. Her plan began to take shape, piece by meticulous piece. She started meeting with a lawyer, a shrewd, discreet man named Benjamin Carter, who operated out of a small, unassuming office 2 towns over. In their first meeting, she didn't speak for 10 minutes. She simply slid a heavy-duty flash drive across his desk. On it were 19 years of her notes, scanned documents she'd recovered from shred bins, audio recordings from the burner phone she'd sometimes leave hidden in boardrooms, and photographs of sensitive files she'd taken in the dead of night. Benjamin Carter, a man who had seen the very worst of corporate malfeasance, sat in stunned silence for a long time after reviewing the contents. Finally, he took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and looked at her with a newfound sense of awe. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice heavy, "once you fire this shot, it's going to bring the whole goddamn building down." Eleanor just nodded, her eyes like chips of ice. "It's already falling," she replied. "They just can't feel the ground shaking yet." A slow smile spread across his face. "I'll start drafting the paperwork." The strategy was brutally simple. Let them continue to walk deeper into their own trap. Let them keep seeing her as nothing more than the cleaning lady. Let them underestimate her one last, fatal time. She wanted them arrogant, comfortable, and completely oblivious. Because the fall always hits harder when you never even saw the cliff. But sometimes, even the most patient, controlled burn needs a single, unexpected spark to ignite the inferno. And that spark was about to be struck on a miserable, rain-swept Tuesday afternoon. It all started with a goddamn cupcake. Eleanor had just finished her afternoon sweep of the 3rd-floor break room. She had wiped down the sticky counters, emptied the overflowing trash, and refilled the container of cheap powdered creamer that the company laughably labeled as premium. She was pushing her cart down the long, carpeted hallway that led to the conference rooms when she saw it. A single, half-eaten cupcake with garish blue frosting, sitting directly in the middle of the floor. Not on a plate, not even on a napkin. Just dropped there, a deliberate smear of frosting ground into the beige carpet fibers. She bent down slowly, her knees protesting with a dull ache. There was something about that cupcake that felt intentional, a petty act of passive aggression, like someone had left it there specifically for her, just to see what she would do. As she carefully picked up the mangled pastry, she heard a voice drip with condescension from down the hall. "You missed a spot. Der States." It was Julian Croft, Thorne's right-hand man, and the heir apparent to the CEO throne. A man who oozed smarm from every pore, standing at the end of the hallway with his hands stuffed in his pockets, a smug, reptilian smirk plastered on his face. She turned her head, just enough to meet his gaze. "Excuse me?" He sauntered towards her, his expensive shoes making no sound on the thick carpet. "Right there," he said, pointing a manicured finger at the perfectly clean patch of floor next to where she had just picked up the cupcake. "We've got the board from Zurich flying in for a presentation in 10 minutes. Think you can give this whole area another pass before they arrive? We want to project an image of competence." There was no spot, not a speck of dust, not a single scuff mark. The carpet was immaculate. Eleanor straightened up, the crushed cupcake in one gloved hand, the cold metal handle of her mop in the other. She said nothing, her silence a stark contrast to his oily chatter. Croft stared at her for a beat, then let out a short, dismissive chuckle, as if she were a dim-witted character in a joke only he understood. "I swear," he said, shaking his head, "sometimes I think you people just push dirt around to stay on the clock." Her eyes, which had been placid moments before, narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What people is that, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before the smirk returned. "Oh, come on, don't get your panties in a twist," he said with a condescending wave of his hand. "I'm just saying, If we paid you a little more, maybe you'd actually find the dirt before I have to point it out to you." He winked at her, a gesture of such profound arrogance it almost took her breath away. She blinked once, her face returning to a mask of blank neutrality. Then she nodded. "I'll make sure it's spotless, sir," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Croft clapped his hands together once, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet hall. "That's what I like to hear, atta girl." He turned and walked away, pleased with himself, confident that he had successfully put the help in her place. He had no earthly idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. That night, Eleanor didn't go home. After her shift ended, she made her way down to the sub-basement, to the Sterling Thorne archival records room. It was an area she had quiet, unrestricted access to, thanks to a master keycard she had found on a sink in the executive washroom over a year ago. The manager who lost it had been fired for his carelessness, a fact that brought Eleanor a grim sense of satisfaction. She moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, pulling files, photographing shipping manifests, confidential emails, and internal budget reports with her burner phone. Most importantly, she found and printed the bonus declarations from the previous fiscal quarter. The report showed that Marcus Thorne had awarded himself a staggering $2.5 million performance bonus for streamlining operational efficiencies. Meanwhile, in that same quarter, he had cut the driver's meal stipends, eliminated overtime pay for warehouse staff, and frozen wages for all custodial and administrative personnel. The final, irrevocable straw came the following morning. One of the other janitors, a kind, middle-aged woman named Maria, stumbled into the locker room, her face streaked with tears. Her teenage son had been in a serious car accident the night before, and she had put in an emergency request for an unpaid day off to be with him at the hospital. Her request was denied. "Insufficient staffing coverage," the official email stated. Denied. Eleanor sat on the hard plastic bench, listening as Maria sobbed, her body shaking with a grief and helplessness that was agonizing to witness. No one from the 44th floor cared. She was just a cog in the machine, a name on a schedule easily replaced. Eleanor didn't say a word. She just stood up, her jaw set like concrete, pulled her phone from her bag, and stepped out into the alley behind the building. She dialed her lawyer. "Benjamin," she said, her voice a low growl. "It's time." His voice was calm on the other end. "Are you sure, Eleanor? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back." "I'm sure," she said, her eyes fixed on the towering glass prison before her. "All right," he replied. "It's going to get messy." A cold, grim smile touched Eleanor's lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I've been cleaning up other people's messes my entire life," she said. "Let's begin." Over the next 48 hours, the pieces on the chessboard began to move, manipulated by an invisible hand. Eleanor transmitted the final, damning pieces of evidence to her lawyer. Benjamin Carter, in turn, executed the plan with the precision of a master strategist, formally requesting a closed-door emergency shareholder meeting and scheduling a complete corporate governance review, citing his client's legal rights as the majority stakeholder. The funniest, most pathetic part was that none of them saw it coming. Life inside the Sterling Thorne Tower continued on its arrogant, oblivious course. Not a single person noticed when Eleanor came in the next day, not in her faded gray jumpsuit, but in a sharply tailored charcoal coat, a crisp silk blouse, and a pair of leather heels that had never once touched a mop. She walked right past the front desk, offering a polite nod to the stunned security guard. She didn't even glance at the custodial closet that had been her sanctuary and her prison for 2 decades. She took the express elevator straight to the 44th floor, to the boardroom. The words she was about to speak would do more than just change her life. They would shatter the very foundation of power they all thought they understood. The boardroom at Sterling Thorn Global was a temple of corporate excess. It featured 12 obscenely expensive leather chairs, a gaudy, oversized crystal chandelier, and a 30-foot, custom-milled mahogany table that Marcus Thorn loved to boast had been crafted from a single, 200-year-old tree. He seemed to think this fact was supposed to impress the people who had to crawl underneath it to scrape gum off its polished underside. At 10 a.m. sharp, the emergency board meeting began. Thorn stood at the head of the table, exuding an aura of impatient, bored authority. His tie was loosened, his arms crossed, as if he owned the very air in the room. To his left sat Elizabeth Finch, his vicious second-in-command. Next to her sat the remaining board members, a collection of pampered, complacent men and women who hadn't had an original thought in decades. The only person missing was Curtis Sterling, who had been forced into a quiet retirement years ago. A loose end Thorn had neatly tied up. Eleanor walked in 5 minutes later. The heavy door closed behind her with a soft final click. She moved with a silent, deliberate grace. No mop, no cart, no gloves, just a navy blue blazer that fit her perfectly and a single unassuming leather portfolio in her hand. Thorn looked up, his face contorting into a mask of annoyance. "I'm sorry. We're in the middle of a private meeting," he snapped, not even bothering to make eye contact. "Maintenance is supposed to come after hours. Please see yourself out." Eleanor didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. "I'm not here for maintenance, Marcus." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. The air grew thick, heavy. Elizabeth Finch squinted at her, a look of vague, confused recognition on her face. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" "I do," Eleanor replied, her voice calm and clear as a bell. She walked slowly, deliberately, to the empty chair at the far end of the table. "And I believe all shareholders were properly notified of this meeting." Just then, the door opened again, and Benjamin Carter walked in, his briefcase in hand, his demeanor as serene as a calm sea. "Good morning," he said, his voice filling the suddenly silent room. "My name is Benjamin Carter. I am the legal counsel for Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the majority shareholder of Sterling Thorn Global." Silence. A profound, deafening silence. Marcus Thorn's mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. His face, normally tanned and smug, had turned a pasty, sickly white. Eleanor placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. The sound of the latch clicking echoed like a gunshot. Inside were the original notarized partnership agreements from 1998, the updated ownership documents from her anonymously held LLC, and a legally binding letter signed by Arthur Vance and witnessed by a federal judge, transferring his full and uncontestable voting rights to her upon his death. Thorn sank into his chair, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "No," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. That can't be right. That's impossible." Eleanor finally looked directly at him, her eyes boring into his. "You remember the contracts, Marcus? You and Curtis tried so hard to bury them. You thought I was just a grieving, helpless widow." He couldn't speak. He could only stare. She stepped forward, her voice low and steady, each word a perfectly aimed dagger. "For 19 years, I have watched you. I have watched you take the company my husband built with his bare hands and turn it into this monument to your own greed. I watched you pad your bonuses while you cut your employees' health insurance. I watched you ignore safety violations that put people's lives at risk. I watched you fire good, decent people for daring to have a conscience." She looked straight at Thorn, her gaze unflinching. "And I watched you turn my husband's legacy into a playground for your pathetic, fragile ego." Thorn finally found his voice, sputtering with a desperate, flailing indignation. This is insane. This is some kind of a scam, A corporate shakedown." "It's not a scam, Mr. Thorne," Benjamin Carter interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "All of these documents have been independently verified by the State Board, and as of this moment, Mrs. Vance has officially called for a vote of no confidence in the current Chief Executive Officer, a vote which, as the majority shareholder, she controls completely." Thorne slammed his hands on the table and stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You don't know the first thing about running this company," he roared. Eleanor walked slowly around the table, her gaze sweeping over each and every stunned face. 19 years, she said, her voice resonating with the weight of 2 decades of silent observation. "You all looked right through me. You saw a uniform, not a person. You let people suffer. You let this company's soul rot from the inside out. I gave every single one of you 19 years to show a shred of basic human decency." She paused when she reached Thorne's chair. He stood there, trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "And you failed," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Every single one of you." He turned a blotchy, furious red. "You think you can just walk in here and take over?" She leaned in close, her voice for his ears alone. "I don't have to take it over," she whispered. "I already own it." Benjamin Carter calmly placed a small stack of letters on the table in front of each board member. "Effective immediately," he announced to the room. "Mr. Marcus Thorne's employment contract is terminated for cause. Security has been notified and is waiting outside." Thorne's voice cracked. "You can't do this." He looked around the room, his eyes desperately searching for an ally, for someone to stand with him. He found nothing but a sea of pale, frightened faces, their eyes darting away from his. He was alone. Seconds later, 2 large, stone-faced security guards entered the room. They didn't speak. They simply stood by the door, waiting. Thorne, stripped of his power, his arrogance collapsing like a house of cards, grabbed his phone and his briefcase and stormed out of the room, a broken, defeated man. Elizabeth Finch, suddenly remembering a very important, non-existent meeting, scurried out right behind him. Once the room was clear of the rot, Eleanor turned back to the remaining, shell-shocked board members. "I'm not here to play CEO," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "I'm here to rebuild what this place was always supposed to stand for: integrity, respect, and hard work." One of the younger board members, a man who had always looked deeply uncomfortable with Thorne's leadership style, slowly raised his hand. What do you want to do first, Mrs. Vance?" Eleanor allowed herself a small, determined smile. "We start," she said, "by listening to the people who have been ignored for the longest." She closed her portfolio with a decisive snap. "The real work starts today. But just because you finally take out the garbage doesn't mean the house is clean." And Eleanor Vance knew, with every fiber of her being, that the real battle was only just beginning. Have you ever had a boss like Marcus Thorne? A person who made you feel small, invisible, and worthless? I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments. Let's create a space where the invisible are finally seen. The following Monday morning, for the first time in 19 years, Eleanor Vance parked her modest sedan in the executive parking garage. She didn't like it. The space was bigger, closer to the entrance, and shielded from the elements. But it felt sterile, disconnected. It was a space reserved for people who had forgotten the feeling of rain on their skin, for people who didn't know what it meant to truly sweat for a living. Nevertheless, she parked, took a deep breath, and walked into the building she owned, her head held high. She greeted the morning receptionist by her first name. "Good morning, Isabella." The young woman's eyes widened in stunned recognition. "Mrs. Mrs. Vance. It's just Eleanor now, she said with a warm smile, and continued toward the elevator. No mop, no cart, just a simple leather-bound notepad and a calendar that was already booked solid for the next 3 months. By 9:30 a.m., she was in her new office. The 44th floor corner suite that had once been Thorne's gilded cage. The walls had been repainted over the weekend, erasing any trace of him, but the panoramic view of the Boston skyline that he used to brag about remained. She barely glanced at it. There was far too much work to be done inside. Her first official act as the head of Sterling Thorne Global was to call an all-hands staff meeting. Not for the board, not for the remaining executives, but for the employees. The drivers, the warehouse crews, the administrative staff, the customer service representatives, and yes, the janitors. All of them were invited. The large auditorium filled quickly. The atmosphere was thick with confusion, suspicion, and a palpable sense of anxiety. No one knew what to expect. Eleanor walked onto the stage, stood at the simple podium, and looked out at the sea of faces. No microphone, just her own voice, clear and strong. "I want to start," she began, "by saying thank you. For 19 years, most of you never knew who I was, and you didn't need to, because your hard work, your dedication, your resilience, it spoke louder than any job title in this entire building." She let that sink in for a moment. "I am here to change things," she continued, "but I cannot and will not do it alone. I have spent nearly 2 decades listening to your frustrations, your fears, and your brilliant ideas, quietly. Now, I want to hear them out loud." A nervous energy rippled through the crowd. This was not the corporate doublespeak they were used to. A veteran truck driver named Sal, a man with hands like worn leather, slowly raised one of them. Does this mean we're getting our overtime back?" "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation, "and you will be receiving retroactive pay for the last 2 fiscal quarters. You will see it on this Friday's paycheck." A collective gasp went through the room. A woman from the HR department, Deborah, a woman Eleanor knew had fought against Thorne's cuts, stood up. "What about the health coverage? It's been gutted year after year." "We are already in negotiations with 3 new providers," Eleanor stated, "and before any decision is made, every single employee will receive a survey to weigh in on which plan best serves your needs and the needs of your families. There will be no more backroom deals made about your health and your well-being." There was no wild applause, no dramatic, movie-like celebration. Just a stunned silence, followed by a low murmur that grew into a buzz of excited, hopeful conversation. People turned to one another, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning belief. Someone from the back called out, "What about all the good people Thorne fired without cause?" "We are opening a full review of all terminations from the past 5 years, she answered, her voice firm. "If you or someone you know was wrongfully dismissed, you will be contacted. I can't promise reinstatement for everyone, but I can promise you that your name will be cleared, and your story will be heard." Another voice, younger this time, shaky but clear. Are you really the owner?" Eleanor allowed a genuine, heartfelt smile to grace her lips. "I always have been." She ended the meeting with a single, solemn promise. "If you speak, I will listen, and if you work hard, you will be respected. This is my vow to each and every one of you." After that meeting, things didn't magically get easier. In fact, they got harder. The remaining executives, the ones who had been loyal to Thorne, did not welcome her with open arms. They saw her as a threat, an outsider, a janitor playing dress-up. A few tried to subtly sabotage her decisions, arguing that she didn't have the requisite MBA or the strategic business acumen to lead a global corporation. One particularly arrogant VP questioned if she even knew how to properly scale growth. Eleanor looked him dead in the eye and said, I successfully scaled my grief into a silent 19-year siege. I think I can handle your spreadsheets." That was the last time he questioned her competence. She began to dismantle Thorne's toxic regime, piece by piece. She brought in new department heads, promoting from within, elevating talented people who had been repeatedly overlooked because they didn't play the political games. She tore up lucrative contracts with vendors who were friends of Thorne and renegotiated fair deals with local, more deserving businesses. She reinstated the annual company picnic and the Employee Appreciation Day, two events that had been mysteriously cut from the budget years ago. She made it a point to visit every single department, from the loading docks to the data entry pool. She sat with them in their break rooms, ate the same sandwiches they ate, and just listened. And slowly, ever so slowly, the soul of the building began to return. It didn't feel softer. It felt realer. One evening, Maria, the janitor who had been denied time off to see her son in the hospital, left a small, handwritten note on Eleanor's desk. It simply said, "I didn't think anybody like us could ever make it to a place like that. You proved me wrong. Thank you." Eleanor folded the note carefully and placed it in her top desk drawer. It was more valuable to her than any stock certificate. But even with all the positive changes, one question followed her everywhere she went, whispered in the hallways, hinted at in meetings. She knew she would have to answer it, not just for them, but for herself. Why did she wait so long? It was the question she heard over and over again. "Why did you wait, Eleanor?" some asked with genuine curiosity, others with a hint of doubt, and a few, a very few, with a quiet resentment, as if she had stood by and let them all suffer for too long. But Eleanor never got angry. She never got defensive. She would just sit back in her chair, fold her hands on her desk, and say the same thing every single time. Because power only truly matters when you know exactly how and when to use it. You see, Eleanor didn't wait out of fear or indecision. She waited because the company, and the men running it, needed to reveal their true nature without her influence. She needed to witness it all with her own two eyes. She needed the rot, the corruption, the cruelty to rise to the very surface for all to see. Because if she had stormed in with her lawyers 19 years ago, they would have called her a hysterical, grieving widow. They would have gaslighted her, spun the narrative, painted her as an unstable woman trying to destroy her husband's legacy. But 19 years of meticulous, silent observation? That made her undeniable. She had seen everything. She had let them play out their own pathetic, greedy endgame. And when the time was finally right, she didn't have to argue or fight. She just had to present them with the truth. And they crumbled under the crushing weight of their own actions. The janitor hadn't just become the CEO. The janitor had become the witness, the prosecutor, and ultimately, the judge. One afternoon, she found herself walking down that same third-floor hallway where Julian Croft had pointed at the imaginary spot on the carpet. Same carpet, same lighting. Except now it was spotless, and no one would ever dare talk down to the woman who cleaned it. A young intern, new to the company, passed her in the hallway, slowed down, and said nervously, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Vance." She smiled warmly. "It's Eleanor," she said, "and good afternoon to you, too." Later that day, she hosted a small, informal gathering for the entire staff in the company's newly renovated courtyard. No long speeches, no corporate banners, just food trucks, folding chairs, and the sound of people laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in a very long time. Sal, the truck driver, came up to her and clinked his can of soda against her bottle of water. "To the quiet ones," he said with a respectful nod. Eleanor raised her bottle. "To the ones they never see coming," she replied. The lesson here isn't just about a janitor who owned the company. It's about how easily we judge people by the uniform they wear, how quickly we dismiss the person holding a mop, or serving our coffee, or collecting our trash, how reflexively we assume that a person's value is tied to the title on their business card or the floor their office is on. Eleanor Vance wasn't the exception. She was the reminder. People do not become invisible just because you choose to stop seeing them. And sometimes, the person quietly sweeping the floor is the one who laid the foundation for the entire building. So the next time you walk past someone you've never really spoken to, someone you've deemed part of the background of your life, maybe you should stop, say hello, ask them their name. You never, ever know who is truly holding the keys to the kingdom. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think, even for a second, then please, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because somewhere out there, right now, there is another Eleanor Vance. Being overlooked, being talked down to, being systematically erased. And maybe, just maybe, she's watching and she's waiting. Let's let her know that we see her. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this are a reminder that the most powerful people are often the ones you'd least expect. And we're just getting started.